Welcome to EngagementB2B.com's lecture series, which is entitled The Essentials of B2B Value-Based Marketing. In this section, we're going to examine the question, what is the difference between value and tiebreaker selling? In our last episode, we talked about a value proposition. Now, it turns out that a salesperson is going to face several types of selling situations. In each one of those situations, the value proposition he or she offers is going to be somewhat different. So today we're going to distinguish between the two and tell you what type of value proposition is appropriate for each. Again, my name is Jim Naris, and I'll be the speaker for today's session. If you need to reach me via email, you can at engagementb2b@gmail.com. All right, let's start by distinguishing two sets of situations. One in which the customer is buying a strategic product versus a non-strategic process. Now, basically what I have for you on the chart here is a standard Pareto chart, which is typically done in a spend analysis by purchasing and supply managers. Basically, if you look at the x-axis, you'll see a series of numbers, and they represent part numbers for products or services that the company buys. On the y-axis, you have the amount that's spent. Well, Pareto chart implies what? The old 80-20 rule, which means that 80% of the items are responsible for 20% of the value, and conversely 20% of the items are responsible for over 80% of the value that's being spent on these items. Now, logically, what's going on today is, given that there are fewer purchasing managers out there and they have more business, they have a tendency to direct more of their time and effort towards strategic purchases and try to get the non-strategic purchases done as quickly as possible. So I want as painless and quick as is possible. Now, that tells me that there's going to be two different situations. One, when I'm dealing with critical items, and secondly, when I'm dealing with more commodity type items. And logically, in those cases, I need not only a different set of value propositions, but also a different way to sell the particular products. All right, now we're going to focus in on two, strategic versus non-strategic, and logically there are other types of products and services that are out there, but given that we have a short amount of time to spend with you, I'm going to boil it down to the two basic categories. Now, what's the difference between value-based selling and tiebreaker selling? Well, we're going to argue that value-based selling is most appropriate when you're dealing with strategic products, and that tiebreaker selling is going to be appropriate with non-strategic items. So value-based selling is not really that useful if you're selling a non-strategic item and vice versa. So how do I distinguish between the purchase and the situation? All right, first of all, in terms of the supplier's goal, customer evaluation processes, the basis of the value proposition, and then the purpose of any value model that you came up with. Well, there are several things. In value-based selling, the supplier's goal, what is it that you're shooting for? A significant price premium, typically over 5%. The customer evaluation process is extensive and it's quantitative, both technologically as well as economically. The basis of the value proposition is going to be value quantification, meaning I want to put a number on the benefits. And then lastly, the purpose of the value model is persuasion in the selling process. So I put together an elegant model. My salespeople use it to sell it. Now, in tiebreaker selling, you have almost the reverse, in that the goal of the supplier, your goal, is to get a slight price premium, maybe 3 to 5% or even less than that, and or to get a major share of the customer business. So I might give up margin in favor of share of customer business. The customer's evaluation process has to be quick and dirty. There are a lot of items that they have to buy. They're not important, therefore they don't want to spend that much time on them. The basis of the value proposition is going to be a single tiebreaker, the one thing that makes them pull the trigger on your product. And then lastly, the purpose of the value model is justification for the purchase. Now the difference here is that the model is used after the purchase by the purchasing manager to justify his or her purchase to his or her senior management, whereas in value-based selling, it's used at the front end during the selling process. So two different situations, two different types of value propositions. All right, now value-based selling is appropriate when the customer is making a strategic purchase. What are strategic purchases? What do they look like? Well, commonly they look like capital acquisitions, strategic alliances and partnerships, outsourcing arrangements, long-term service contracts and agreements, critical components, new-to-the-world technology or products, replacement of a long-standing supplier's brand. The key point here is that this is important, therefore the customer is going to spend a lot of time, effort, and resources to make the right decision because it's going to have long-term consequences. Now, the key thing that a salesperson has to do when making a strategic sale is in the Jerry Maguire movie line, "Show me the money." Therefore, you have to quantify not only the technology but also the economics of the decision to demonstrate the value to the customer because they're going to go through an elaborate evaluation process. The key thing is to quantify the benefits. Now, there's a classic book out there called Spin Selling by a British consultant, Neil Rackham, and he puts it in terms of converting implied product benefits to measurable customer payoffs. So the example that we have here is a gentleman pouring a gallon of cooking oil into his Volkswagen car. Now, it turns out that the Volkswagen, and this is, I believe, a diesel, can run on cooking oil, although you probably don't want to do it for a long period of time. Now, that's an implied benefit because obviously using cooking oil instead of diesel fuel makes sense only if cooking oil is lower priced than diesel fuel. What I need to do is I need to shift that to measurable customer benefit. And what we normally think of when we say measurable is dollars and cents, but it also could be some other metric that can be evaluated. So here we're basically looking at the change in emissions that a car gets after switching to biodiesel. All right, now let me give you an example of shifting from implied to measurable payoffs. And this comes from an ag chem product that goes into cattle feed. The traditional implied product benefit is basically as follows. Our additive's superior binding capabilities will absorb microtoxins from your cattle feed. Now, that sounds good. I mean, I don't like microtoxins. That doesn't sound good. And this is going to eliminate them. So it's implied, meaning that, there's going to be a benefit of taking those microtoxins out. It doesn't give me enough to make a decision. If I convert it into a measurable customer payoff, that statement would read as follows. Our additive will increase your calf survival rate by 5% and your profits by 12%. So in this case, I know in monetary terms why this additive is important to the farmer. So I use value quantification up front as proof for your claims. So again, in value-based selling, the quantification comes up front. By doing so, you'll craft a more persuasive and resonating focused value proposition. All right, so again, the key idea here is to convert implied benefits to measurable customer payoffs, and I've got a list of both types. Under implied benefits, you hear sort of the standard terminology that's used. We're the market leader, we have superior technology. We have a personal account manager. We're a world-class supplier. We have end-to-end solutions, local presence, customized product, one-stop shopping. All of these things are wonderful, but they're implied because I don't know what the payoff is. Now I can convert or translate them into measurable payoffs, and these tend to revolve around the following monetary metrics: lower price, lower cost of use, enhanced revenues, increased asset turnover, greater return on investment, and increased cash flow. So again, the idea here is if I move from left to right, I'm coming up with a more persuasive argument that gets the customer to buy my product. All right, now, what type of money do I use? And you could see on the previous list that there's a variety. The type of money is going to be a function of who you're going to talk to. If I'm talking to purchasing people, well, chances are they're going to be focused largely on price. If I'm talking to an operations person, they're probably going to want to look at total cost of ownership and cost of use. If I move up to a general manager, he or she's going to want to talk about value and use, revenue and profit. If I'm talking to a finance person, he or she's going to want to talk about return on investment or asset turnover. And then if I'm talking to a senior manager, they're going to want to talk about shareholder value, cash flow, and risk. So the type of metric I convert my implied benefit to is going to be a function of who I'm making the pitch to. All right, here's an example of a value proposition for a strategic purchase, and it's a pump that's used in a condiment producing plant. So it's those little blue things at the top of the vats that are there. And basically this one reads as follows: through this pump drive solution, your company will save at least $16,268 per pump on up to 32 pumps relative to our best competitor's solution through the elimination of most downtime, reduced administrative costs associated with procurement, and lower spending on repair parts. All right, so you see the benefits quantified, $16,000 per pump times 32 pumps, and the sentence is basically set up as promise versus proof. So the $16,000 per pump is the promise, and the proof is the elimination of all those costs at the bottom. Now, interestingly, when the salesperson made this pitch, the company bought 3 of the 32 as a test, and what they discovered was that the pump drive actually saved them $21,000 a year, which encouraged them to buy the remaining pumps. So this was a very successful value proposition. All right, now tiebreaker selling is appropriate when the customer is making a non-strategic purchase. Now, a non-strategic purchase applies to all of these things that the company needs that may or may not be essential to their survival. And these include things like routine maintenance items, operating supplies, long-term service agreements, hotel accommodations, office supplies, and commodity items. So it's the basic stuff that you need to operate, but it's not going to break you one way or the other. And more importantly, there are a lot of alternative vendors out there who sell more or less the same thing. All right, now, in order to understand how a tiebreaker works, you need to spend a little bit of time understanding how purchasing and supply managers make non-strategic purchase decisions. Well, basically, it's pretty straightforward. They start off by listing specifications. So if you look at the first row, we've got the requirements of this particular product specified in yellow in terms of weight, volume, frequency, power, range, and price. So this is an electrical or electronic type of product, and those are the specs they want. Then the purchasing or supply manager goes out and identifies viable suppliers. So basically we have 7 alternate suppliers here, and they list what the product characteristics are of their particular product. So I can compare and contrast all of these items with my requirements. Now basically what they're doing here is what's referred to as conformance to specification, in that I'm trying to identify which products meet my specifications, including price. And basically what you can see here is that there are 3 suppliers in green which meet the specs, And then there's 4 suppliers at the bottom in orange who don't meet the specs. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate or narrow my evaluation down to the 3 that are in green at the top, A, B, and C. Now, key point here is that they're more or less the same on the key specifications. So when it's time to buy, I still need to have a reason. So there's got to be something else, something extra that causes the purchasing person to buy my product versus the other guy's product. And we're going to refer to that something extra as the tiebreaker. So what is a tiebreaker? A tiebreaker is the trigger beyond meeting basic requirements at a competitive price that causes a customer to buy that offering. So it's the one thing that pushes them over the line. A tiebreaker has to be a noteworthy difference whose value is self-evident, requiring no time-consuming analyses. So it's got to be a significant value, but it has to be obvious so that I don't need an elaborate model to demonstrate why this is better. All right, let me give you an example of some tiebreakers, and the question is, where do you find them? 4 sources that we've identified in our research: unmet or pressing needs, the usage process that the customer has, the proof of the promise, and then lastly, a strategic initiative. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. A number of years ago, there was a major university in the Southeast that was inflicted with bed bugs in their dormitories, and they had several suppliers that came in and promised to eliminate the bed bugs. Well, the treatments were more or less the same. The prices were more or less the same. The problem in treating bed bugs is that either heat or chemicals don't kill either the eggs or the larvae, so that you might kill the live bugs, but you don't eliminate the ones that haven't hatched yet. In a traditional approach, you can't find it. Well, one of the supplier that won the deal came up with an innovative solution, which was sniffer dogs. A sniffer dog basically has been trained to seek out bed bug eggs and larvae, and they're extremely effective. So they can go through and they can identify where the eggs are so that they can be treated. Now, it turns out in this instance, the other suppliers didn't offer this, and this was the one thing that pushed the university over the line. And the reason was that they wanted to get this done so they didn't have to keep moving students in and out periodically as new bed bug infections or invasions came to the front. So in this example, the tiebreaker was the use of sniffer dogs. All right, to the right, what you see is a series of rebar. Now, rebar are sheets, or excuse me, are strips of metal that are used to hold concrete in place. In major construction, companies use a lot of this. And unfortunately, rebar is rebar, which is a commodity, which means that it's typically sold on price. A very innovative company decided to evaluate the usage process, and what they discovered was that the problem you ran into with rebar was that you had to unload it and put it into the machine that distributed into the molds for the concrete. And the problem that they run into was similar to the one you might have at home when you're making spaghetti. You open up a box of spaghetti and all the noodles fly on the floor or on the counter, and they sort themselves out every which way, and you've got to spend time sorting them out, put them in parallel. Well, obviously, you can imagine that if you had a set of an order of rebar and it fell apart and was all over the floor, it would take a long time to sort them out and get them into the equipment. Well, what this company came up with was a special binding technique that allowed you to drop the whole bundle of rebar into the dispersing equipment and then cut the binding, which allowed the device to be more effective, and it eliminated the dropping and scattering of rebar on the ground. All right, proof of promise, what does that mean? In the construction industry, for basic construction projects, there often is not that much difference between construction companies. The price is the same, the solution is the same. Often what distinguishes them is the qualifications of the site foreman. He or she is in charge of the job. And if you have a good one, he or she gets the job done on time and on spec and under budget. So that someone who's qualified like that is in high demand for a customer who obviously wants to come in on time and under budget. In construction, these people have reputations. So one of the things that you can do when you're in a bidding situation is to say, okay, for your job, I will assign foreman X to the job, and if he or she has a top rating, then that may in fact be the tiebreaker because it indicates that the job is going to be done on time and under budget. And the last idea here is to find out what the strategic initiatives are for the customer firm. And typically each year companies have a strategic initiative, and then to design your value proposition around that initiative. So for example, there's a major agrochemical producer in the United States that one year decided that it was going to minimize their packaging costs, not only in terms of how the packaging was designed, but also how it could be moved about on conveyor belts and in forklifts in a plant. So the successful marketer here came up with a value proposition which was designed around making packaging and the logistics of moving packages more efficient, and in that way they got the deal. So in each one of these cases you have a commodity. In each one of these cases you have a tiebreaker or one extra thing that pushed the customer over the line. So that's the type of thing that you're looking for with a tiebreaker. Now the last thing with a tiebreaker is that in doing so you want to make the customer look good. And this is one of the things we find that most marketing and sales people are deficient at, in that you have to provide evidence to the customer company that a purchasing manager has done a good job. And the reason that that's important is that purchasing managers are kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of most companies. And if you remember Rodney Dangerfield, he had the classic line, "I don't get no respect." In general, purchasing and supply managers, they only hear from senior management when they make a mistake. So anything that you can do to make them look good is obviously going to help guarantee your long-term sales. Now, how can I do that? Well, by providing a value model to the senior management of that company, showing that in fact they're monetarily better off. So one of the things that you want to do in tiebreaker selling is make your purchasing manager look like a hero, make them look good, give them a win, and make sure that their senior management knows of that. It'll do good for you in the long run. All right, again, if you want to learn more about value-based selling and tiebreaker selling, I encourage you to read our books Value Merchants or Business Market Management, which are available on Amazon.com or other fine retail establishments. All right, and last but not least, if you want to learn more about the research that Professor Stewart and I are conducting, go to our website, engagementb2b.com. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to today's presentation. We'll finish up next time with our last in this series, which is going to deal with value-based marketing strategies. Thank you very much and have a great day.